days you work, one whole day to play. Come on, everybody, wear your roller skates today. It's Saturday, 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 it's Saturday, Saturday, it's Saturday, Saturday, it's Saturday,
Saturday with Renee.
Yes, welcome back, everybody, to Black Liberation Media and uninterrupted episode number 141 of Saturdays with Renee, featuring Renee Johnston. I'm Jared Ball. Please like, share, subscribe, do all the things. And Renee, how you feeling?
I'm stressed, yo. I couldn't find my phone. And I was like, where did I put the phone down? So I'm like running around trying to figure out where I put the phone down. And this is definitely my own brain. But so some Saturdays, because I'm trying to stay out of the way of the rest of the house, I'm in the room. So I have like one of those, lap desk things with like the cushion on the bottom and the wood surface so that the laptop is not like overheating on the blanket. The phone was under the lap desk. So I was like running around my house looking for the phone, and it was in here the whole time. So because of that, mad last minute, but I made it before 11. It was like 30 seconds to 11 o'clock, but I made it before 11 o'clock. Bruh. My life.
Yeah.
Yo. I can't.
We today is the grad party for baby girl.
Oh.
So and I think I can get away with this without a problem. But I think I can give you a quick what the house is looking like. So you can see this is what the backyard is looking like in preparation for a few hours from now. And I haven't done any of it. I'm responsible for none of that. I was
going to say, your job is to show up, no?
I have to show up. I have to give a speech later, and that's about it. So
question for you though. So is the grad party for her and her friends, or for you and your wife and your friends?
It depends who you ask. She thinks it's for her. We think it's for us, and we'll see who wins.
See who gets the most guests.
And yeah. And but she is in control of the playlist, so I have to starting at 3:00. So after the show here, I have about 2 hours of music that I want to hear, and then it's a wrap, and then I'm musically a hostage like everybody else. But yeah, but this is it. This is the last one. So there's some happiness, some sadness, some tears of joy and pain and all of those other things. But yeah, it's gonna be a fun day. It's gonna be a fun day, And hopefully they'll have a world to inherit.
Right. Listen. And your oldest is home now, right? Because it's summertime or okay.
Oh yeah, they're working. So I had to I caught a good moment to share just now, because they would not have wanted to be on camera pre getting done up. They're working. But yeah, she's home. Everybody's home. There's going to be several generations of family here, which is dope for them. And yeah, I am a little melancholy. That's a good word for it, Leah. It's bittersweet, and but they're all doing well, off to great things. From our narrow window, the world looks great, and if we could just extend that and duplicate it a little bit, maybe we'd be onto something. But at least for now, we'll see. But you know, now that they're entering a world with our now officially, I think they claim first trillionaire. Now that SpaceX went public, right? And I saw Ben Norton's report.
I have a lot of questions about how this whole like NASDAQ, you're public, but you're not really public. You don't sell anything, but somehow you're in the top 100, so you're automatically funded. There's a lot of
only because I watch people like Ben Norton and them. Do I have some? He only sold 4% publicly, apparently,
right?
And everything else is basically being bought up by his other companies,
right?
So it's like the AI thing. It's they boost their own bubble, and then you know. But the Ben Norton thing, though, as much as that's a problem, that I thought was really interesting was that he reported, I think the other day or whenever, that the percentage of wealth held by the top 0.0001% in relation is now 14% of the country's income. So which is worse than what it was in the 1920s, which was part of his point. And so the inequality is even worse now, even to the extent that it's being, bubbled up by this incestuous, moving the money around from one account to the next. And then to Chidimaka's point, that people are celebrating is crazy. People are celebrating is crazy.
Excited. I'm like, what are you benefiting from this? And then if you work for a company that your 401k buys into this whole NASDAQ, you're basically funding Elon, whether you want to or not. And
it's a beautiful hustle.
It's a wild hustle. It's a wild hustle.
Like it or not, you want to make me rich.
It's crazy. But I don't know. I have questions. I don't know. Maybe you can try and get Ben Norton back, because I have questions. I need people to have a deeper understanding of why this is all problematic. Because
let's. You trying to get Ben back over here. I'm trying to get where Ben's at. I'm trying to get out of here. We need to. That's what I think we need to be trying to do. We need to be getting where Ben is. We need to. Everybody dust off your passports. Let's it's time to bounce, son. It's time to bounce. Anyway, I don't know. But we can, it's always a good excuse to have an excuse to reach out to Ben, and his reports are essential. So we should.
Yeah. All right. Well, since we're talking about billionaires and why nobody else had no money, I think it's probably, as long as Joe's ready, we can not delay the guest entrance. Very
Joe
exciting.
said, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. Welcome.
Right. That's the lot.
Welcome. I'm very excited to have Joe on. So Joe joined Remix a few weeks back, and that was my first time to talk. But y'all know how I am with the conundrum of the electoral politics and understanding the problems with the duopoly. And I'm very, very excited to have Joe here. So we will kick it off, Joe, if you don't mind. We always like to have the guests introduce themselves. If you want to tell the folks who you are, where you're at, what you're doing, all the good stuff, and then we'll get going.
No doubt. Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you both for having me. My name is Joe Tache. I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm based in Boston in the Roxbury neighborhood, and I've been an organizer with the PSL for 8 years, but I'm currently our U.S. Senate candidate for the state of Massachusetts, and we're running with the slogan, "Time's up for the billionaires," which I think I saw someone say in the chat. We got to update now to "Time's up for the trillionaires," as y'all were talking earlier. But basically on the program, that we have the means to meet every single person's needs in this state and in this country and really in the world. But the way that we allocate our wealth and resources is completely illogical and unjust. And we're trying to build a movement that is independent of the two-party system, independent of the billionaires and trillionaires, in order to put power in the hands of regular, everyday working people. And I, we're talking about the stock market and valuations and everything like that. I studied business at Northeastern University in Boston. So I would love to be able to contribute on that front. Unfortunately, business education is kind of a sham. So I can contribute as much as I can from that education. But anyway, I think that was a big part of me becoming a socialist, was getting the education in the classroom about how to be an administrator of the capitalist system, and then getting the education on campus and in the community as an activist, and having those two parallel tracks led me to the path that I'm on now.
Can I sort of put you on the spot real quick? Because I just got asked the other day in passing, I made a comment about the difference between political science, economics, and political economy. And I was arguing that in U.S. mainstream so-called higher education, they don't teach political economy by way of the institution. It's always political science or economics. Could you maybe say a word about that training, what you get in economics, versus what we should be getting vis-a-vis, for instance, the PSL and a political economic analysis?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I think in my experience through my education, and I also did take political science classes at Northeastern too, as I was becoming politicized. But in my experience, in any of those fields of higher education, the assumptions of the capitalist system and the logic of the capitalist system are taught as objective realities. So instead of actually investigating who owns what, who decides how resources are allocated, how does that influence the political and cultural organization of society, instead you get taught that this is how the economy works. And the economy is just capitalism, but they don't really teach you in those certain terms. And for anything that they can't really explain with logic or science, which is most things, they say, oh, there's an invisible hand, or you have to start with certain assumptions, like a perfectly informed supplier, a perfectly informed consumer, and they reach an equilibrium. And you don't take into context all of the power that the supplier has and the lack of power that the consumer as a worker has. So I think in my experience being a socialist and doing more rigorous political education with the PSL and studying independently, you actually do investigate those fundamental questions and understand that there is this interrelation between politics and economy and culture. But a big role of the university in the United States is to just build a consensus around the status quo and prepare people to plug into the status quo as cogs in the machine. So that's why I was kind of making my tongue-in-cheek comment about the business education, because it's not really rigorous in my experience. It's trying to prepare you to play a specific role.
Thank you. This has been Dr. Ball's argument all along about education and the problems within the system, that we're just training little cogs to be more cogs in the machine. And so but I appreciate your willingness to say that you went to Northeastern and to
Our experience.
Right. Because your mic is cutting in and out. Do you hear? Is that just me, Jared, that's hearing that, or? Sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
It's a little bit choppy. Yeah.
How about now? The same?
Well, yeah. Nope. That's better. There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
I was just saying, Dr. Ball, you got the banner, a product of my people, my enemies. That's how I feel about Northeastern. So.
Salute to Winnie Mandela. That's her quote, by the way. I just can't fit everything in that space, but she was right, and I get it.
So I have so many questions now about Northeastern, but we have to put all of that aside. So Oh, I always so many questions. But so you are running for Senate, right? The seat that you are running for is currently held by Ed Markey, right?
That's right.
Um, and Ed Markey is a long. I mean, I can't even remember how many decades that man's been in the Senate. Easily to probably 4 or 5 decades. No, I mean, how long has he held that seat?
Well, he started as a in the House of Representatives. So in total, he's been in Congress since 1976. It's been half a century. He'll be 80 years old at the time of the election. He's a Cancer like me. His birthday's in July, so he's turning 80 next month.
So he's been, so just so we're clear, he has been in Congress as long as I have been on this earth, as I was born in 1976, which is
And this
wild.
is how you know they're shady, because I'm 50. I'll be 55 this year, and I can't wait to retire. I would have been retired if we had a more just system. So the idea that somebody wants to keep working at 80, suspicious. It's suspicious.
Facts. So I mean, and we talked about some of this on Remix, but not everybody watches both shows. So if you could, for us, detail, I understand, as I think a lot of people will understand, that you running with the PSL is a very different, it's a very different process than Ed Markey, who's already gotten the nod from the Democratic Party, who, they go through these machinations of pretending like they work within democracy. You instead are actually representing the PSL. It was a decision amongst the PSL for you to step up and do this run. Can you talk to people about that process and what it means to say, like, I am going to run as a PSL candidate in this race?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And you mentioned earlier having a struggle with the question of how to approach electoral politics in general under this system where it's designed to protect the status quo. And I'll say for myself, I became a socialist because I was disillusioned with electoral politics. And I was a young man when Barack Obama was first elected, and I was very excited in 2008. And I was being told that we were entering a post-racial society and we had solved all the major problems. And to then see over the course of his 2 terms, the U.S. destruction of Libya, which had been the most profitable or prosperous country in Africa, to be reduced to rubble and to reintroduce so many social problems in that country, including slave markets. To see that Obama administration deported more undocumented immigrants than any before, to see that banks were bailed out while so many families in the United States, including many Black families, had their homes foreclosed upon, to see Trayvon Martin killed in that administration, and in so many other cases of police brutality. And that was my really introduction into politics, was participating in the movement against police brutality, and to see nothing addressed about the ingrained issues of racism and policing in the United States under Obama's administration. After that, I was like, all right, I'm done. I've dealt with the two-party system. I'm done with electoral politics in that sense. And I started to try to study more about the history of social movements here in the United States and also around the world. My dad's from Cameroon in West Africa, so I also looked a lot into the independence movements of African people. I have a picture of Amilcar Cabral behind me, who's a great leader of the independence movement in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. And as I studied our history here in the U.S. and across the world, I'm like, oh, these people are fighting for socialism, are fighting for revolution. And that really informed my perspective on how social change and transformation happens. It's not through one person or even a handful of people getting elected and then ushering in the change, but any positive or progressive or revolutionary change in history has happened because regular everyday people in massive numbers have taken collective action to say enough is enough and we're not putting up with the status quo anymore. So for me, I've dedicated my life in the last 8 years to helping build that movement. And I don't see this Senate race as a jumping off point to launch my political career, to house my own personal ambitions, or to position myself as any savior of people, which I think are all the things that people typically associate with electoral politics in the United States, but it's rather something that I've been asked to do to help continue to build the party and help to continue to build the movement. And yeah, I think it's interesting talking to people all across the state about the campaign, because people have a certain framework about what politics is and how change happens. So they're like, well, what are you going to do in your first day or first 100 days or whatever as a senator to deliver on XYZ issue? And of course, and to some degree, you have to take responsibility as a leader or a spokesperson to be a fighter and to continue being part of the movement that I have been part of for a long time. But also, I think part of this campaign is to cut down some of those notions that people have about politics and be very clear that even if I'm elected to the Senate, I'm one independent socialist senator in a sea of 99 hostile or maybe 98 and a half hostile senators in the rest of the United States Senate. And if you look at, again, I think I like to give historical references, because I think the civil rights movement is such a great example that everybody or many people know about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but no one really thinks about Congress as the driving force behind those acts, even though they had to be passed by Congress. The Congress that passed those acts would have voted against them just years before. But it's really the overall crisis that U.S. capitalism found itself in around the world. It was the strength of the civil rights movement that started with the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, all the way up through Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, and the rebellions that were emerging in cities all across the country that created the conditions for the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act to be passed. So to me, it's explaining the campaign in that context. Like, it's not about me so per se as an individual. It's about using this campaign as another tool to build a powerful movement that can actually win, because we believe that that's the whole belief that the PSL is predicated on, that transforming our society is possible, that no system is permanent or inevitable, and capitalism with all its crises today definitely isn't inevitable, but it's also not just going to spontaneously transform into a better system. It's going to take people coming together to fight for that. And this campaign is one vehicle and one invitation for people to join in that movement.
Thank you. So, and I understand how this all, we've had so many conversations with PSL folks, and I work very closely with the PSL in New Jersey and New York because I just find them to be really good folks to organize with. They show up, right? But can you talk a little bit more about, because what often I get from people when I try to explain what PSL is doing, and I'm not a PSL member, so I try to make it clear to people, like, I'm not speaking for them, I'm not a member, but this is what I see the work. So one of the things that people push back on a lot is, well, they're just trying to grow PSL and they're not really trying to do what needs to happen in order. Can you talk a little bit about that pushback? Because it's one that I often hear that honestly annoys me a little bit, because part of the work has to be to grow something somewhere outside of the duopoly. But can you maybe talk about that a little bit, and how do you respond to that type of pushback?
Definitely. Well, I think to your point, I guess there's two questions. One is, are we trying to grow our organization? Well, yes, as I think any organization should be trying to grow and advance its goals. And we do believe that in order for change to happen, in particular for socialist change to happen, that working people, oppressed people need to be politically independent of the people who are exploiting and oppressing us. So if all of our movements funnel back into the Democratic Party at the end of the day, which is part and parcel of the billionaire class's political power, then that is going to replicate dead ends. And we've seen that for social movements throughout my entire life. So yes, we're trying to grow the PSL, and I feel happy about that, to see that our organization is growing. It's a good sign. And at the same time, I think we have an appreciation for the fact that any social change is part of a broader movement that is a constellation of many different forces and many different organizations. And those organizations are going to agree on many things, disagree on some things, work together on some things, work independently on others. That's good and healthy and natural. And ultimately, there's a lot of work to be done in general on, you know, the in the left or progressive sphere to reach people who have who are fed up with the status quo and who are actually interested in alternatives. Like one thing we've been talking a lot about in the PSL is the fact that around 2/3 of adults in the US, young adults, so between the ages of 18 and 29, have a positive view of socialism. That's 34 million people. And if you add up the membership of all the different socialist organizations in the United States, it's a fraction of that 34 billion. And you can, that's only among young adults. And then there's also people of all ages that are becoming interested in socialism. So there's the point being that there's a big opportunity for the entire movement to grow. And we think that the more that movements that are fighting for justice, that are fighting against capitalism, that are fighting against the symptoms of capitalism, the more those organizations are growing, the better it is for increasing our collective chances of pushing back. So I think it's both possible to be invested in your growth as an organization and invested in the growth of the movement as a whole. And that's the orientation that we take.
And what do they think the Dems are doing, by the way? Like, when, you know, in other words, because the tacit, as I understand that same argument, the tacit argument they're making is, at least some, is, well, we then have to support the lesser of evils, or then they will say, unless they're making a specific argument as to why we should support another alternative party, which maybe gets into some specifics that are worthy of some attention. But in general, I usually hear stuff like that as a means to get us back to either not voting at all, as sort of an amorphous, ill-defined tactic, or to get us back to the vote for the Democratic Party, as if they're not doing the same thing, organizing for their own party interests, et cetera, and so forth. So, yeah. So I just 2 cents thrown in there real quick.
No, which makes sense, which is why I asked the question, because it inevitably is going to be somewhere between the comments and well, all they do is this, but that's the whole point, right? So last week we had Gabriel Rockhill on, which was a fascinating conversation, and he has a different take on why he makes some of the choices he makes during, you know, these duopoly-led, contentious conversations. And I struggled with his answer, because I recognize why his answer is what his answer is. I don't agree with it particularly, but I recognize that there has to be, we are living in a time and place where I don't know how we're going to force anything without pushing more people in. And so you have this, this struggle of like this in between, right? Like, we can't change anything if no one's there. We can't put people there without making space for people to be there. The argument he was making was the only way to make space for people to be there is to kind of figure out who's going to be the least problematic. And really and truly, like, my argument, I think, is more along the lines of, the assumption is always, I think, that the Democrats are less problematic. And I don't agree with that assumption. So my problem always boils down to, this presumption that things would be so much different if Harris had won. And I'm not convinced that things would be so much different. I think things would feel different to people. I think things would be presented differently in media. I think a lot of those things, yes, are true. But I do think at the core of it, the policy, the problems, the wars, the genocide, all these things would still be the same. And so I struggle with this, this whole like, well, we have to go with the group that's going to be easiest to fight, because I think it's an assumption that people make, and I don't necessarily agree with that assumption.
And one thing I keep forgetting to make the point about, that I'd like to make it more clearly, is that one thing that keeps getting left out of that argument is that the only reason we have Trump now is because of the previous victories of Biden, Obama, Clinton, Carter. Pick the Democrat going back. In other words, if the Democrat that gets elected actually does what anybody hopes that they think that they've been convinced and psychologically disturbed into, tricked into thinking can be done, then there would be no Trump. Trump is a product of, in many ways, in some ways, of people saying we thought we had something here, and now we didn't. Whether they go in the correct direction that Joe went and said, look, I gave this dude a shot, he betrayed us, so I'm going to the left, or whether they go to non-voting, or whether they went in some cases to the right, it's in large part, I think, because of them. So this whole thing of, don't tell me my vote for the PSL cost Kamala and a safe, world that would have been in, had she won. Don't tell me that. It's her whack ass campaign, her whack ass party's politics, the betrayal of her previous colleagues. That's what led us to this decision and to this place, rather. So anyway, please go ahead. Yeah.
No, I agree completely. I was going to make a similar point. Donald Trump on the campaign trail in 2024, he started so many of his rallies asking people, is your life better or worse now than it was 4 years ago? Which he took out of the Reagan playbook. And if you step back and think about the context in which Joe Biden is elected, and he's coming out of this massive rebellion against police brutality and racism after George Floyd and so many others are killed. He gets elected. The Democrats have control of both houses of Congress. They promise they're going to deliver on universal child care, free community college, student debt cancellation. We get none of that. We get a very, very watered down delivery of their program. They let all of the COVID era safety nets expire, including the child tax credit in 2022, I believe. So you have the biggest modern spike in childhood poverty in the US because of the expiration of this tax credit. You have obviously the genocide in Gaza, and people seeing that billions of their tax dollars are being used to bomb refugee camps and schools and hospitals abroad while people here are struggling to survive. I mean, you had the overturn of Roe versus Wade and the promise that the Democrats would enshrine abortion as healthcare, which they have had many opportunities to do over the past several decades and never did. So yeah, then you come into 2024 and it's not that compelling of an argument to vote for the person who was the vice president of that administration, which feels like a continuation of the status quo. And people's votes for Donald Trump, by and large, are, I mean, of course, you have the kind of the wealthy racist base that is the core of the kind of MAGA movement and Project 2025, etc. But there's also people who have voted for Donald Trump as a rejection of the status quo. And I find it astonishing that there's this common sense acceptance in U.S. politics that the party of a first-term president is always going to lose their majority in the midterms, because that means that it's assumed that the party that gains power is not going to deliver on programs to meet the needs and satisfy the needs of people, and people are going to seek for an alternative. And we accept that this seesaw is a normal thing, but actually it just results in us continuing to spiral to the bottom, because if neither the political parties are delivering on programs that meet the needs of everyday people and instead are more accountable to their billionaire donors, then of course life is going to get worse for everyday people year after year. And every single metric points that out, that life is getting more expensive, our wages aren't keeping up, and the rich keep getting richer. And that has been the fundamental truth of my entire life. I'm 30 years old, and that's been the truth of my entire life. So of course, people are not going to be looking to the Democratic Party. But there's also, it's shown that there's a lot more people who believe that there need to be third parties than would actually engage in third party politics at this time, because you do have to make this calculation. And I mean, I'm of the mind that Trump is kind of a extreme and unstable manifestation of the worst tendencies of US capitalism. So I do think that there are things that are happening today under his administration that are in some ways unprecedented in US capitalism, but they're also a product of a society that's run by billionaires and racists and bigots. So it's no surprise that Donald Trump is an expression of that. I mean, to quote Malcolm X, chickens coming home to roost. I think that's what Donald Trump's presidency really represents.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
My bad. I was just waiting. There were so many requests for it that and moments, and before you continue, I did want you to, if you could, to double back and make that point again about the midterm expectations, because I think that's could you just, and then by all means finish your
100%.
thoughts.
I appreciate the hype video. Anytime you want to throw that in. The point I was making about the midterms is that there's like certain things that are accepted as common sense trends in US politics. And something that almost always happens is if a president wins the election and their party has control of Congress, it almost always happens that party loses control of Congress in the midterm elections 2 years later. So people who have become so excited, this happened with Obama, for example. They have the super majority in the Congress in 2008, and after the first 2 years, they lose it. And it's likely going to happen to Trump and the Republicans this year. And it's because people are so desperate for some kind of change. And if you only this is the trick of U.S. democracy, that if you only get presented with two options and you let that option play out for a couple of years and it sucks, as it always does, then, well, I guess I had to go to the other option. And most people don't really identify strongly with either the two parties and are just searching for any hope at a break in the status quo. So the point I was trying to make is I'm sympathetic to people who want to restrain the very right-wing vicious element of the capitalist class that Donald Trump represents. And I understand there's a certain logic to voting for Democrats if you believe that they can restrain that right wing, because I mean, you see all the things that the Trump administration is doing, but clearly that is not what the Democratic Party does in function. They actually enable the right wing because they fail to deliver on programs to meet the needs of working everyday people. And so in my estimation, in the estimation of the PSL, well, you could keep voting and participating in those two parties and hope that one day, miraculously, the Democratic Party is going to wake up and a major section of the party is going to break from the billionaire influence. I think you're going to be holding your breath for a long time on that. Or you can do the hard thing and build an alternative that actually is accountable to us as regular people rather than to the billionaires. And for the record, there's also much more that we do than just electoral politics. I was trying to mention earlier that we view the collective action of working people as the key thing. And that can take place in your neighborhood, it can take place in your workplace, and yes, it can take place in electoral campaigns too. But we're building a very different type of party than the Democrats and Republicans. And I think that as I've seen people in my generation more and more be willing to take that leap outside the two-party system, because not only are things not getting better, but we're seeing these looming crises. Climate change. There was an article in the New York Times yesterday that the Democrats are basically abandoning climate change as like having a program on climate change. Xavier Becerra, who won who looks like he's going to become the governor of California, or at least he moved on in the primary. He takes a lot of money from the oil and gas industry. Senator Markey, who's the incumbent in the race that I'm running in, introduced the Green New Deal in, I think, 2019, never really talks about it anymore. Kamala Harris was debating with Donald Trump in the 2024 election about who was friendlier to the oil and gas industry and friendly to fracking. So we see climate change, we see artificial intelligence, we see war and militarism, like these big crises that capitalism has created that are in many ways existential for humanity. And so not only is life getting worse, but we have like a kind of ticking clock in solving these issues. And if the Democratic Party isn't going to address them, which I think it's been made clear that they're not, then we need to build something else.
I appreciate that. And it makes me think, one of the things that I like to remind people, because this is my theory on the Democratic Party, which is their goal is not to actually do anything that's helpful to the people. And the more the Republicans are able to go further to the right, because the Democrats just trail behind them to the right. So as you know, things get more and more out of control, the response from the Democratic Party is never like, let's go to the exact opposite and do all the things that people actually need, right? It's always, let's just do a little bit less than what the right is doing, because then we'll be a little bit better than what they are. And that's all we really need. And that's why, in my opinion, this thing keeps going, right? Because the goal is never actually to do the thing that people need you to do. The goal is to do just enough that you are not as bad as the people that you want to present as worse than you. And then they just get away with actually doing nothing that's beneficial. It's infuriating to to say the least. And I think that's why I have such a hard time with these arguments about lesser evils, because, you know, as Malcolm said, like, pulling out the knife part way doesn't actually fix anything, right? Like, where's the fixing of the harm? Where is the changing of the policy? Where is the actually moving through on the things that you promised to do? It is infuriating. I already said it, but like, it's just so fucking annoying. But
I agree. Can I add something? Because I mean, I think you're 100% right. And I think something people have to understand is that the Democratic Party is not just the accumulation of the people who vote for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is an institution in and of itself, and it's made up of cadres. It's made up of structures that are trying to maintain a certain status quo. Like, though the people who really make up the Democratic Party establishment, they are part and parcel of the capitalist system, and they may be more socially liberal on particular issues than the wing of the capitalist class that the Republican Party represents. But fundamentally, they're a capitalist party, and they want to maintain the Democrats as a capitalist party. You know, there's another Democrat who's running in this Senate race, Seth Moulton. He's currently a congressman in Massachusetts. And, you know, on the day, the first day that Zohran Mamdani met with Donald Trump in Washington, D.C., after he was elected as mayor of New York City, the House of Representatives passed a resolution to condemn the horrors of socialism. And it was, I think, 86 Democrats voted with all of the Republicans in the House in favor of this resolution. So you have your most talented and popular politician who's going to DC to meet with the person who's supposed to be the biggest enemy of the Democratic Party in Donald Trump. And instead of expressing any type of solidarity towards him or affirming your support for him, you take the time the morning that he's going into this meeting to condemn the politics that he represents and the movement that he's a part of represents. And that wasn't just one or two Democrats. It's the 80-something Democrats in the House, including Representative Seth Moulton. I think that tells you that the kind of inner core of the Democratic Party is very clear that it is a capitalist party. And yes, they're okay with some social reforms that the Republican Party wants to roll back, but they're not okay with redistributing the wealth of our society. And they're not okay with prioritizing working people's needs over the billionaires' profits. But they have this complication where their coalition of voters is working people, it's Black people, it's women, it's immigrants. And so they have to pay lip service to these social issues, but they actually have no intention or desire to implement those structural changes in society. They just want to maintain the equilibrium of capitalism. And so, yes, that's why it's very frustrating, because they're saying one thing out of one side of their mouth, and they're doing the complete opposite because what they're saying is meant to shroud the core of who they are, which is capitalists who want to protect the system.
There we go. Listen. All facts. I appreciate this. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this again so I can just bask in how much like you agree. We're in agreement on so many of these things. Can you talk a little bit about your actual campaign? So when your team first reached out to Black Liberation Media, it was because you had just, done your signatures and you had fully like outdone what you all were even trying to do, given what was needed. Can you talk a little bit about that work, the signature collection, and what is next now that things are moving forward? What's the next step?
Definitely. Well, I'm really proud of the campaign that we've built so far, because it's really hard to build a third party campaign in the United States. I saw someone in the chat asked, like, why has the United States gone so long without having a third party? And the system is set up to make that happen. It's very hard to get ballot access. It's very hard to get any resources. And it's very hard to feel like you're building momentum, because if we had a parliamentary system, for example, and your party got 3% of the vote in the parliamentary elections, you would get 3% of the seats. And now you have access to the floor, and you have access to the media, and you have access to the legitimacy of being elected into the government to grow your party. And you can go from 3% to 6% to 12%, etc. If you get 3% of the vote in the United States, there's nothing. You get to go home. And it's set up that way to maintain this equilibrium between the Democrats and the Republicans. So yeah, we collected 20,000 signatures in 15 days in our campaign to get on the ballot in Massachusetts with no paid canvassers. It was all volunteers. I was out there all 15 days, either in the morning rush hour or evening rush hour. And you could see the openness in talking to people on the street about our program. So for some people, I would tell them I'm a socialist running for Senate. And before I can even say anything else about the program, they'd say, "Oh, socialist, sign me up." And for other people, they would say, "Oh, yeah, I remember talking to one person in the train station. He was just standing there after work, and we approached him like, oh, I showed him our campaign material that said Times Up the Billionaires. He's like, oh, I was just thinking about how I'm mad at the billionaires right now." Like, it's everywhere in our society, people are feeling this disgust with the status quo. And that is why the system also makes it so hard to make third-party candidates or third-party campaigns visible. Like, I thought it was a pretty interesting news story that our campaign, that's a third party that had no paid canvassers, was able to collect 20,000 signatures in 15 days, faster than any other campaign. And we sent out press releases to all the local media, and none of them picked it up. It's not a coincidence. It's a deliberate ignoring of our campaign and what it represents, which is a break from the two-party system. There's a debate happening next week on June 16th between Seth Moulton and the Republican candidate John Deaton. Ed Markey declined to participate. And the irony is that Moulton and Deaton were both calling out Markey for dodging the debate because everybody in Massachusetts should be exposed to all their options. But then when we reach out to them and say, well, yeah, we agree, everyone should be exposed to their options. How about you invite me to participate in this debate? It's crickets. And I ran into Seth Moulton at the Pride Parade where he was getting booed because just a year and a half ago he made transphobic comments, and now he's trying to be like a chameleon and blend into whatever the political moment calls for. But I saw him at the Pride Parade, and again, just dodged my questions around getting invited to the debate. So there's this deliberate exclusion from a deliberate exclusion of an independent perspective, and that's really what our focus is on right now as a campaign, is getting everywhere across the state. Right after we finish up here, I'm driving out to Springfield in Western Mass. We're having a campaign event out there. We've been to Cape Cod. We've been to Lowell in Northeastern Massachusetts, obviously having events in Boston. We're trying to get everywhere because we know that our program does resonate with people, but the onus is on us to build a very strong ground game, a strong social media game to build a movement around the campaign, because unfortunately the other elements of publicity are not available, or at least not yet available to us in terms of the corporate media, etc. And definitely not the big PAC donors who allow these candidates to buy, airtime on commercials, etc. So that's really our big focus right now, is meeting people.
I appreciate that you want to take responsibility for building a campaign and a media apparatus to support it. But I do think also that the onus is not just on you. It's also on those of us in these spaces that are both aware of your efforts and similar efforts, and who have access to one or another platforms to make space for the discussion, even debate, even disagreement. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite everybody who's here now to like, share, subscribe, put this discussion in your socials, invite others to join the discussion, invite others that you peruse in terms of your social or media diet to invite Joe and others to debate, discuss, and share, and challenge your favorite hosts and platforms to do that kind of work, so that we don't hear at election time one more time, well, if y'all had ever done anything in between each election, and maybe we would have heard, so in this moment, I have to vote for the lesser of evil because you all haven't built anything, and maybe next time. So we can maybe start to circumvent and undermine rather that approach as well. So I think it is on us to pick up the challenge of inviting these kinds of discussions of electoral politics into as many spaces as possible. And again, we don't have to agree. It is just it is expose people and let the discussions expand, and maybe we can see something better happen at some point, etc. and so forth. So that was it. I just wanted to echo that real quick.
And it's important. I mean, I have a couple of thoughts, because of course, we have this massive chaos happening in Maine right now with Plattner, who's running, and all these stories behind him, because I wasn't fully following the old tattoo and something about text messages and all this stuff. And so you have this quote unquote working class person, right, who says that he's trying to change things from within. The minute you start getting endorsed by, some of these old school Democrats, I'm always questioning whether or not you're actually about what you're about, because that immediately it makes me nervous. Like the minute all the old whites in the Democratic Party.
And I was just going to say, deculturation already went at Graham and everybody supporting him. So that's in fact that was the first reason I ever heard of dude, is because deculturation was like, who is this fake ass claiming to be left and people support this nonsense? So when I saw your article, I got a brief look at it this morning that Joe sent, that I said, yeah, buddy, this is some wild. So I'll add it to the show description, where people can also already find Joe's campaign link. So so they can follow up there as well.
So folks know, I was trying this. The reason this is coming up is because you mentioned what you mentioned about the media, Joe. And so I was trying to find an article that really explained how this process within the Democratic Party worked, right? So he started getting these, like, first it was Bernie, then it was the chick who I never can remember her name, the white lady who said she had Native American, and so Trump started calling her Pocahontas.
Warren, Elizabeth Warren. Yeah,
Elizabeth Warren signed on.
Pocahontas.
And so all that was happening, and then Schumer was like not saying anything, and then Markey wasn't saying anything, and then he won. So then now all these people who weren't signed on are now signed on, which people really should question this, right? Like, if you as the Democratic pick are endorsed by Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, Like all these people have to question what is happening. And if you can't ask that question, there should be something else like in the brain. So this website, which is a right-leaning website, is the very conservative. There was some questionable things there, but it was one of the few articles that I could find where it talks about this switch within the Democratic Party. And it's because only like Fox News is reporting, like it's all, and then the Boston papers, which you have to pay to access the articles, right? So it brings to question the role of media in all of these things, right? Like, why isn't the media talking about these endorsements and this change within the Democratic Party? Because it wants you to think that this dude is like this outlier, right? Like he's the one that's going to come in and fight and do the thing within the Democratic Party that people want to happen, which is never going to happen because the Democratic Party eats itself every time. Like whenever someone wins who has run on a campaign that's supposed to be about the people, they get in there and all of a sudden all the stuff that you thought they were going to do magically disappears. And, one of the things I've always said is I'm never running for any of these seats. And so like, I won't know what it's like to get in there, what they do to cause people to become the people they become once they win. But to me, that's why you can't run as a Democrat, right? Like that's literally why you can't do it. And so someone in the chat was like, well, why not run as a Democrat and change it from within? You cannot change it from within, right? Just similar to the way you are never going to reform law enforcement. There is no changing from within.
Well, would anybody ask Joe if they thought I'm going to join the PSL and turn it into a Wall Street corporatist party from within? You know what I'm saying? Like, with that, like.
I never thought to ask that question, but that is
me either, actually. So, but you know what I'm saying? Like, because this shit just sounds so absurd going to the demo, or when the same thing. Like, Jared, why didn't you, from your glorified janitorial position in the U.S. Navy, turn it into a peace operating mission force? You know what I'm saying? Like, why didn't you? Why wasn't your aircraft carrier dropping food baskets and healthcare on the Iraqis during Desert Storm, Jared? You know what I'm saying? Like it's my bad. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
You're good. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I appreciate that question because I think it does draw out some of the absurdity of it. For me, I think even like depersonalizing, because I think when you get into politics and candidates that people are very, very excited about or very skeptical of, it can become more of like a personal exploration versus, to me, investigating like what is the politics behind this and is it actually a viable path forward. And I do think there's something to be said for the theory of change of somebody who's running within the Democratic Party, and in particular like the theory of change of most people who are running for office, which is very individualized, where I'm going to get elected and do X, Y, Z. And even with Grant Plattner's campaign, it was framed within always taking back the Senate for the Democratic Party. Like that's a framework that he has consistently used in his political advertising. So there was no pretending on his part that he was not a Democrat, and seeking to participate in this overarching goal that the Democrats have in the midterm to gain a majority. But I think for me, the theory of change is really an important thing. Like, do we really, the capitalist system is very adaptive and is really trying to preserve itself politically, economically. On the world stage, there are people working around the clock to maintain the dominance of the capitalists. And that includes maintaining control over the political parties. Someone in the chat mentioned this too. Like there are people who are working to make sure the Democratic Party doesn't get taken over. Like think about the process of choosing a Democratic Party nominee, where you have primaries all across the country, and based on how those primaries go, the candidate who wins the primary gets a certain number of delegates to the Democratic convention, and then all of a sudden there's super delegates, and they're kind of just they're not really explained that well, other than they have a vote at the convention, but none of the Democratic Party base voted for them. They're hand selected by the Democratic Party establishment to ensure that even if somebody like Bernie Sanders or going forward someone like AOC were to win the Democratic Party nomination, that ultimately the person that gets nominated is going to be somebody who the establishment is comfortable with. Like, they have their own structure set up to ensure that. And so I think it is, honestly, it's a fantasy to think that you're going to reform the party from within. And I think it's also a fantasy to believe that you, as an individual senator, are really going to make that much of an impact in terms of the policies that get put forward. You can write a great bill. Again, I talked about the Green New Deal and Senator Markey introducing that in 2019. In 2026, are we any closer to having the Green New Deal or addressing climate change than we were in 2019? No. So, like, we can separate this out from the personal feelings about XYZ person, but we have to actually look at, does this theory of change work? And that's why I'm in particular really excited to be running this race against Senator Markey, because you have a 50-year sample size of this guy saying we want to address climate change. We want to. He's in favor of raising the federal minimum wage. The federal minimum wage buys you less now than it did in 1976 when his career started. So, like, in any metric, you talk about healthcare, any metric, things are getting worse now than they were 50 years ago. And again, I don't put that on the foot of any one individual person, but it is clearly a failed theory of change. And instead, I look at inspiration from the civil rights movement, the labor movement, the women's movement, the abolitionist movement against slavery, like things that actually have transformed the country. And if you look at how that happened, the starting point was not electing a senator to change the constellation of forces from one party to another in the Senate. There have been times that maybe we could get into in U.S. history. I take inspiration in particular from an old Massachusetts senator, Charles Sumner, and the role that he played in the abolition of slavery, but it was in the context of a broader movement. And I think that is an understanding that has gotten erased in U.S. history, that change happens through the people. Change does not happen through a savior politician. And it's kind of it's a complicated thing to be able to explain to people as you're running a race for U.S. Senate, but I think that's a really important responsibility that I have to explain what we're trying to do.
By the way, that history also very quickly erases what was the true foundation, which was the uprisings of the enslaved. So that was just it. So to your point, if abolition is used as an example, a struggle that really began with people in actual struggle being redefined by, or being appended or mended, attended to, or added on to by a political movement that then is completely reduced to the issue of voting. So it's like a slow fade out and erasure of the kinds of struggle that should be remembered at minimum. So yeah. But, all that is well said. Yeah, go ahead, Renee. Sorry. Yeah.
No, you're good. Joe, did you want to add something to that before I ask you another? Because look, I don't know how much you watch on Saturdays, but I'd be having a list of questions. So we.
I'm done. I do, if it's cool, I do want to talk a little bit about the abolitionist piece a little bit more.
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
Because Juneteenth is coming up. I think it's important to know this history. And I really see a lot of parallels between the conditions that emerged to abolish slavery and the conditions to abolish capitalism as two systems that to a lot of people seem permanent. But of course, slavery wasn't permanent, and I argue capitalism isn't either. And it's something I think when you get to the point of the Civil War and the general strike of enslaved people leaving the plantations, many of whom joining the Union Army, that was the final blow to the Confederacy, like enslaved people and abolitionists taking history into their own hands. But I think the political situation in the country prior to that is also really instructive, because again, I was learning about this in the context of Massachusetts history. In 1850, to even zoom back a couple years before, in 1848, you have the Mexican-American War. So the U.S. Slavery forces go into Mexico, steal a lot of land, and turn it into pro-slavery territory. And then 2 years later, you had the Compromise of 1850, where the senator from Massachusetts at the time, Daniel Webster, he brokered this deal to allow the passage of the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, which meant that slave catchers could come to a state like Massachusetts where slavery was illegal and kidnap Black people and take them into slavery. And that did happen multiple times. And they could do that under the power of a federal warrant. I always says it sounds a lot like ICE today. And those two things made it feel like for a lot of people that slavery was stronger than it had ever been, the Mexican-American War and the Compromise of 1850. But it also created a political crisis because you had two parties at the time, two main parties, the Whigs and the Democrats. Somehow the Democrats were still around. And the Whigs, a lot of their base was against slavery, including in Massachusetts. And they saw that their politicians were actually conceding to slavery and allowing slavery to expand its power. And that is how Charles Sumner was elected as a senator in Massachusetts in 1851 after the Fugitive Slave Law was passed, explicitly as an abolitionist. And he was one of only 3 abolitionists in the entire Senate at the time. And he went on the Senate floor a few months after he was elected and argued for the repeal of the Fugitive Slave Law. He was shouted down. He couldn't win the vote, but he was using the Senate as a floor to speak on behalf of the movement and bring more people into the movement and grow a political party that was independent of the two-party system of the time. First, the Free Soil Party that became the Republican Party, which, there was many flaws with those organizations, but just to say the two-party system was ruptured because of the crisis of slavery. And over those years, the anti-slavery organizations like the Vigilance Committees, the American Anti-Slavery Society, other political parties grew into a constellation of forces that actually moved abolitionism from like a fringe trend or tendency in society to a mainstream political movement. And that political movement merged with the actions of enslaved people in the South to defeat the Confederacy. And I think when you step back and look at it like that, that's the example of how I think about our interventions in the electoral arena. Charles Sumner did not get elected and did not, by a stroke of a pen, the next year abolish slavery or even repeal the Fugitive Slave Act or some of the most, overreaching aspects of slavery, but use that platform to help grow organizations and a movement, and ultimately was part and parcel of collective action of many people to transform society. And I think that's an important version of history to be taught instead of in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation and then all the slaves were free and happy.
Which wasn't true. And then, but even your version left out what is now my favorite part, especially after what I've learned over the last 6 months, which is that all that you mentioned was given a nice, appropriate middle finger from John Brown, who said none of what you motherfuckers is doing is of real value. Click clack. And it went how it went. It was what it was, but I just want to throw that little bit in there because to me also what that does represent is that he like others that are represented in that form of struggle were thinking beyond all of these accepted mainstream encouraged imposed forms of struggle. And all of it had a lot to do with the relative success of the abolitionist movement and so on and so forth. So absolutely. But no, but I like that version too. Right on.
You just gave me a whole history lesson that I really appreciate because I hated history, both in school and currently.
Because they taught it wrong. That's why, again, it's not your fault.
You know what? Absolutely. But I'm also the person who got thrown out of U.S. history because my history teacher was mad that I said Christopher Columbus was an idiot who got lost, and so we
Hey,
can't be.
I made a
Listen,
John F. Kennedy lover break his mug in
listen.
undergrad. That's still my the highlight. I was like, Kennedy won shit. And he tried.
Ooh. Oh
So we
man,
all have our little, you know,
real
not to
easy.
disrespect the man on
I
the
hate
wall behind you,
history.
but a little victory every once in a while.
Listen,
Yeah.
I hate history because it is the story that is never told correctly. So if history was an accurate reflection of the things that actually happened prior to me being here, I would not hate history. But the problem with history, both in educational setting and in popular settings, in museums, in all these places, is it has shit to do most of the time with the reality of the things that people need to understand. So, you know, it is what it is. Like, I can't. It's not my fault, right? Like, I didn't design it, but this is what we are living with. It's all nonsense, and it's all perpetrated in a way so that people are told the wrong story. One of the things that, and I hope Gabriel is mine. I keep bringing is because it's so fresh in my head. One of the things that he said last week that really sat with me, and that I'm continuing to sit with as I'm trying to navigate this whole situation, is how propaganda, like the reminder of how propagandized we are as people who live within these borders, right? We are not, as people who live within these borders, folks who are told real history stories, the reality, and the history books get changed on a whim, right? And so you turn around and the history, all of a sudden the history book is not what it was 40 years ago. But so if history was history, how is the book changing? Like, how is that even possible, right? And so when you consider how all of these things factor into people continuing to just follow along and pick between these two duopoly points, and this binary system that should not exist, because the reality is nothing is binary, right? Like, everything is a flow between two things, this constant contradiction and push and pull. And so I didn't mean to get us off track, but I don't like when people. I feel like there's something happening in the chat right now, and I'm trying not to get annoyed by it. But it's deeply, deeply frustrating when you have people who are content to live within this system as it is. And that's a lot of people, right? Like, there's a lot of people who are, because they're not paying the price of it. Like, they're content to keep just prodding along, voting for the lesser evil, dealing with what comes because they're okay. And it's problematic for me that people don't understand that your comfort costs everybody else, right? And I don't think anybody's comfort should be at the cost of anyone else.
Yeah, well, I think that what you're speaking about highlights the importance of building independent media like y'all are doing, or building independent political organization, because like we were talking about at the beginning, there's nothing that's really neutral in society. So I was talking about my education at Northeastern University. I'm taught business or economics or political science like it's an objective thing, but it's actually, I'm being taught to reproduce the logic and to help maintain the system that is been set up by the capitalist class. And you look at the corporate media, you look at schooling, you look at popular culture. Like, some of the things I go back and watch some of the things that I watched as a kid growing up, and all the anti-communism or anti-socialism that just snuck in to like an innocuous kids show is kind of wild. So it's like from jump, every step of the way, we're trained to think a certain way, and the political parties also contribute to that. So to me, that's part of the urgency of building independently, that we can't think that people are going to magically gain a certain consciousness when everything in your life that you're exposed to is oriented towards preventing you from reaching that consciousness. And unless we have our own media, political parties, cultural and social spaces then we're not going to be able to actually develop that independence. But I really do feel like, in my experiences, like being out in the field and talking to people from, you know, Roxbury, which is like a Black and Latino neighborhood, to Cape Cod, which is, you know, there's diversity everywhere, but it's more white than Roxbury for sure. But there's a lot of working people who are struggling under capitalism, to all the different towns in Massachusetts. I can see that our program does resonate with people, and people, just from your own experience in day-to-day life, you can feel that things aren't working. Like, if you get your gas bill and you can feel that things are not working. So there's opportunities for sure to fill that gap. And I think that's what's gonna take to move people out of that malaise that you're describing, Renee. Because if you're only exposed to a super narrow set of choices, then yeah, the choices that you make are not necessarily going to be ideal. But if we can do the work of building up institutions that can feel viable and vibrant and exciting to more people, I think that's when you're going to see more and more people joining up with those things. And that's been my experience even the past couple of years, seeing the PSL grow a lot more quickly than we were in my first couple of years organizing in the party. But we still all have a long way to go.
And shout out to Claudia, because that campaign definitely played a role in getting people to have, you know, a fuller understanding of what the PSL does. So you mentioned earlier that, you know, one person going into Senate can't change Congress, which I fully agree with. But like on my end, and, you know, hopefully, you know, listen, I feel like you winning, like, I don't live in Massachusetts, so I can't vote for you. But like, if you win and you're in Senate, right? Like, to me, this opens a window for people to understand that you don't have to go there and do the thing that everybody else does, right? So hopefully, if you do win, you don't make me come back to this day and eat my words, right? But I think there is a real role for being the person who just doesn't comply, right? And I wonder if that plays a role in all, you know, in kind of your thought process as to how things would work when, you know, if and when you did win.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And you're definitely not going to have to come back and scrub this conversation, because I think it ties back into, I'm very solid in my theory of change and who I'm responsible and accountable to. And it's a very different starting point from even progressive people who are running within the Democratic Party. So you don't have to worry about that. And I agree with you completely in terms of the space that opens up. And that's the real reason why I brought up Charles Sumner earlier. And also appreciate, Dr. Ball, you bringing up people like John Brown, because I don't want to provide like an oversimplified version of the history, but more so exemplify how the role that an electoral campaign or elected official can play if they're connected to a broader movement. So, you know, that people may have remember learning in history, Charles Sumner got caned, beaten with a cane on the floor of the Senate. And it was because he was speaking out against what he called the rape of Kansas, where pro-slavery settlers were rushing into Kansas trying to make it slave territory. But also there were abolitionists who were fighting back, John Brown among them. And so Charles Sumner was using his spot on the Senate floor to stand in solidarity with the abolitionists who were fighting against the pro-slavery takeover of Kansas, and to provide wind to the sails of the rest of the abolitionist movement in joining the fight to stop the spread of slavery in Kansas and other places in the Midwest. So I agree completely that if I was on the Senate floor and able to talk about, for example, the fact that we spend not just the most of any country on our military every single year, but more than countries 2 through 10 combined. And if we were to cut our military budget by 90%, which is proposed in our program, that we would still spend the third most of any country in the entire world on our military. And that would open up over $900 billion every single year to invest in things like healthcare, housing, education, childcare. And I think that is one of the greatest tricks of the two-party system, is to make things that are common sense seem infeasible. So universal healthcare is so crazy, so expensive, even though we're paying already more than any other country in the world on our healthcare every single year through our tax dollars. Like, we're working hard, paying taxes to the government. The government is spending all this money on healthcare, and yet we have bad health outcomes, and so many people don't have health care at all because that money is going directly into the pockets of the insurance companies. Like, that's the majority of United Healthcare's profits, for example, come from Medicare and Medicaid. That's our tax dollars. And the pharmaceutical companies, of course, are making bank off of our tax dollars. And so instead, we could actually just have a common sense healthcare system where we pay taxes and that goes to funding healthcare and everybody could have it and no one has to go into debt. And, you know, medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy in the country. So being able to expose these things, you know, these people in Congress are not all that smart, really, if you ever interacted with a politician. They're shills for the status quo. And I think having a voice that is independent from the corporate capitalist class and is able to establish the fact that actually socialist solutions are common sense would go a long way in creating a more of a climate and ecosystem for the whole movement to grow and express its power. So I definitely, as much as it pains me to say, because I'll be around a lot of people I don't want to be around, I would like to be elected for sure, because I think it can play a good role in growing the movement. But that's my framework for it, rather than I'm going to be elected and somehow change the hearts and minds of the 99 other senators.
So I would like, I'm going to offer a trigger warning here, because I was just sent something that I would like for you to respond to, because it offers a much more popular and regularly.
Are you about to pull up this thing that I'm gonna fight you?
No, I don't. You will be equally upset, but I think but I'm not sure if it's the same thing or not. But Joe mentioned bank, and here we have an alternative theory for change, with an alternative theoretical approach to the use and value of a bank.
What's next for you?
Become the Federal Reserve of the hood. We're going to create 1 million Black businesses. I've already told you about that. One MBB changes the culture and our mindset in our neighborhoods, our communities, and our families from where we are to, I mean, Black folks are amazing. We've been doing so much with so little for so long. We can almost do anything with nothing. And so I think we've changed our mindset so we know we can do anything and can role model that for a future generation.
So Joe, we have the John Hope Bryant approach that is well promoted, that is going to be in Roxbury, if it's not already. I'm sure he has an Operation Hope outlet in Roxbury, with the solution for that community being his outlet, or his entity, his business being the Federal Reserve for the hood. If we could start with just that concept, given your background in economics, could you just if we just unpack that claim, what would it mean for there to be a Federal Reserve to the hood, if we understood what the Federal Reserve's relationship is to the national economy? And then anything else that you might want to offer as a response to that very well promoted version of and theory of change for the hood. You're muted, by the way. Sorry, you're muted.
My fault. I had to mute because I was muttering under my breath about.
No, I mean, when you're presented, when you're before such brilliance, it sometimes forces you to want to be quiet. I understand. Yes.
I was gonna say it might be hard to formulate an intelligent response to that, because I honestly don't really know what he's even saying. But it's interesting because, you know, the U.S. doesn't have a central public bank in the way that we should. And the Federal Reserve is more so a tool to try to, again, maintain the kind of stability of the U.S. capitalist economy. And so managing interest rates to ensure that, you know, prices don't rise too fast or too slowly, and to ensure that there's not a major rupture in the capitalist system. I mean, they don't do too well because there's always ruptures, but that's the kind of purpose. So in that context, Federal Reserve for the hood, I'm honestly, I don't even know what you're talking about, bro. But I would assume it's more so in the model of like microfinancing that happens throughout the global South, where you have very wealthy people who exploit the desperation of working class and poor people to give them a loan to create some sort of entrepreneurial venture and then be put into a debt trap to continuously be repaying interest to the person who's giving them money, which is, the general how credit works in all facets of our society today, from your house to your car to your personal credit card debt. Everybody is drowning in debt and is constantly paying an increasing sum off because the interest every single month is sacking up faster than you can keep up. So I think that's really what he's hoping to be, is to turn the hood into a permanent cash cow for his operations. And I think there are many people, not many, but there's a small class of Black people who have been afforded a certain level of formal education and economic standing in our society, who, instead of using that education as a tool to help uplift the entire people, use it as a tool to assimilate into the status quo and exploit their people. I'm reminded also of, so-called former revolutionary Van Jones talking about artificial intelligence, saying AI might be the closest thing that Black people could get to reparations, because he has an AI startup that he's trying to make money off of, not actually uplift Black people as a whole. And one of the things I'm really inspired by Amilcar Cabral, because he's somebody who grew up in Cape Verde, was colonized by the Portuguese, was allowed to go to Portugal for college with the expectation that he would then go back to Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau and be an administrative colonialism. And he realized, and he has a book about this and writes often about it, that you have a choice to make if you're in that situation. Are you going to go along with what the colonialists and the capitalists want you to do, or are you going to return to the source, return to your own people, and use the tools that you developed to actually uplift your people? So I have a very, also, having been in a higher educational space, I have a lot of disdain for people of that particular background, Black people of that background, who use their personal enrichment and frame it as uplift for all of our people. And it's a big part of why I'm a socialist as well. I think that's really the solution for Black people, who the majority of whom are working class, the majority of whom are struggling with things like healthcare, housing, education, like everybody else. And there's no reason for that in, one, the richest country in the world, and two, a country that was built in large part on the backs of the labor of the very Black people in our families who are struggling to survive today. So yeah, he can keep that idea and hold it to himself. We don't want any part of that.
Now listen, that's called my boy.
Just thought it was a nice little I don't know, interregnum word that keeps coming about, like a little pause break to have to quickly dismiss of John Hope Bryant. But yeah, thank you for that.
Because Jared be choosing violence. I don't even understand like why. I'm getting Stephen A. Smith on my phone from Geechee. John Hope
Geechee
Bryant
is crazy.
Y'all
Geechee,
choosing violence, and I just feel like it's unreasonable. What
is Stephen A. Oh my goodness.
I don't know. And as I said in response, I am not watching that madness because it's violent. There's no reason to send me on this path. We're supposed to be talking. I invited Geechee since he always be talking about policy and stuff and third party politics, and he on my phone talking about Stephen A. Smith. Made me want to fight somebody. I don't understand what's happening right now.
But he is somebody who is considering, if not already deciding, to be to from the other side of the political world enter these arenas. And because he says something about Trump and then Trump says something bad about him, he'll be promoted in some circles as a progressive alternative to MAGA. And I think Renee is right. That's just violent.
It's just wrong. This is wrong and unreasonable.
In his own words, blasphemous.
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. What'd you say?
I said in Renee's own words, it's blasphemous.
It's
See?
blasphemous.
That's
As soon as Terrell Owens said Max Kellerman is blacker than you, he has been in a political death spiral. But yeah, Stephen A.I. Smith, that's funny. Yeah.
So you said a couple of things that have me thinking about Lara Shiha. And I don't know if you're familiar at all with her work. She, if folks are not already signing on to watch Psychic Militancy, please do. If you have not invested in a copy of her book, From the Clinic to the Streets, please do. But one of the things, and I just finished watching, she does a conversation with Ntume on her channel. And they started talking about the conversation they had on Ntume's channel, which somehow, like, I thought I had watched, but apparently I had not. So I had to go back and watch the one on and listen to Ntume's podcast with Lara. And, you know, there is a real conversation to be had that I think people are not having about the fact that the system is the problem, right? So there's this inherent existence of this thing, and everyone keeps getting the work of media and government and all these forces is to convince us that this thing exists, and it's like this mundane thing that just exists that we have to support because it's there, but really, like, it is the problem, right? And one of the things that Lara says often, that she's Fanonian, and she's always speaking about Fanon and why she has so focused on some of his lessons as part of her practice, is that liberation is the precondition. And I have to remind myself all the time of that phrase, right? Liberation is the precondition. And if you go into every conversation with people, every argument about the duopoly, about government, about media, understanding that you have to believe that your freedom and your humanity is already preconditioned. And anything that is trying to convince you that you are supposed to be doing something in order to gain something that is a precondition is just there to be in the way and to distract and to give you something to focus on that you should not be focused on. And there's so many conversations that I feel like need to be had about people not understanding that the block that all of these, you know, again, media, government, all these things, the block that they present, it's presented so that you don't understand that liberation is the precondition, right? And I'm curious about when you go to speak to people and they just don't get it. Because if you're all over, you've had to have experienced this at this point, I'm sure, multiple times. How do you, if you are able to, or even if you aren't able to, how do you address the people who do not understand that this whole system is set up to block you from getting the things that you're already supposed to be able to have access to?
Yeah, it's a good question. To me, every interaction is like a seed. So I think even if you have an interaction with somebody and it doesn't go well at all, it doesn't mean that you haven't planted a seed that can sprout at some point down the road. And I'm of the opinion that more and more people have definitely woken up to the failures of the system, and only more are going to continue to do so because it's just so bare in front of you. And you can so directly, I mean, Trump, just a couple months ago, towards the beginning of the war on Iran, he said, you know, we can't fund healthcare and childcare because we have wars to fund. I mean, they're just explicitly saying the quiet part out loud right now. And I have a lot of faith in people's capacity to grow and learn overall. So I spend the majority of my time focusing on the people who are looking for alternatives and a solution to the status quo, and bringing them in through our campaign and empowering them to feel like it's not that it is our campaign, you know, that they have ownership over it as well. But also for sure, like at town halls, I've had experiences with people who may be more dug in or more skeptical, and I try to hear them out, understand what they care about, where they're coming from. I think that's something that is very important for anybody who wants to make change. Like, you have to seek out the perspectives of other people and understand, do they have something to offer me that I don't yet know, or is there some reason that what I'm trying to communicate is not landing with them? Like, do I not understand them well enough and what they care about and their perspective to be able to shape a message that connects with them? But by and large, I think having faith in the long-term project. And okay, if I had an interaction with you today and didn't go well, maybe in a couple months from now we'll reconnect and things may have changed a little bit, or a couple years from now. And I think having the perspective of being in the PSL for so long has given me an appreciation for that as well, because I can see that the socialist movement, socialist politics, and the PSL as a particular organization have all grown so much in the last 8 years. So I know a lot of people feel a level of, you know, cynicism or hopelessness given the current state of the world. But for me, I see so many more like dedicated organizers, revolutionaries who are really putting their lives towards trying to build a better society and a better world. And many of those people I've only met in the last couple of years because they just came into the movement in the last couple of years, but they're so committed. And I know there's a lot more people out there like that. So I try not to get too low on the lows, I guess, understanding that that is going to be inevitable. And someone who's stuck in the mud now may not permanently be there, and not get too down on the fact that, yeah, inevitably I'm gonna be having those conversations out on the campaign trail.
Thank you. And shout out to Ntume, who is currently out and about with Andre Easton. Shout out to Andre Easton, who's running in the Bronx for a congressional seat. And the reason, so someone in the chat was like, "Where's Ntume?" They're talking about PSL. Ntume is out doing work. That's where Ntume is at. He can't be out on these YouTube streets right now. But it brings me to the question about working with folks in other states, in other places. Is that like part of the effort on your end? Like, how much conversations are you having with other PSL candidates, if any? Like how does that play a role?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. I know I've met all the other PSL candidates, and we had a great virtual event with the different PSL candidates and peace and freedom candidates, and another socialist candidate, Jasmine Brown, in Pensacola, Florida. We had a great virtual event a couple weeks ago. Andre, great person. Greg, who's running for the Senate as well, Greg Levy in Ohio. Is very important for these campaigns. Obviously, we have different contexts. Obviously, we're doing different things in terms of the areas that we're at, in the particulars, but overall, we're each a component part of a broader movement that is trying to stake out a pole that is independent of the two-party system and that has a positive and optimistic view for the future of our society. So, again, I think that is something that distinguishes our campaigns from other quote-unquote progressive campaigns that are running, you know, they may be called insurgent campaigns within the Democratic Party, but still within that same political project. And I'm really excited to see the fact that in California, Ohio, New York, Massachusetts, Florida, we've got these campaigns that are committed to building outside the two-party system, not just in our local areas, but nationally, and building a strong national movement. And we obviously live in a very diverse country, demographically, economically, etc. But also there's a lot of shared struggles from people from Massachusetts to Pensacola, Florida, and beyond. So I think I hope that people are paying attention to all those campaigns, regardless of if you live in one of the areas that the campaigns are running or not. It's an exciting time and something that hasn't been done in recent history, to have really dynamic campaigns running as open socialists outside of the two-party system and in communication and conversation with each other.
Thank you for that. My last question, and I'll say it again, I'm really thankful to you for coming. This was exactly the conversation, especially after that brief bit on Remix, that I thought we were going to have. And I appreciate the amount of knowledge that you are bringing to the table. Like, this is not what you have shown me today, which I gotta say, I'm thrilled that you are every bit of what I wanted you to be as a guest, is like a true understanding of a lot of the things that most people are not willing to have these discourses about, right? Like, I think part of the problem with our duopoly and this binary system that we live in is all the conversations end up being about why the other team is worse, right? So you don't get conversations about what's really happening, like what are the real problems that need to be focused on. You don't get conversations about the true, like, the history and why some of these things, why you have the beliefs that you have. And I think so much of that distracts, the fact that we don't have those conversations distracts from the real issues that should be focused on as part of this political process. I keep talking about this conundrum that I have with understanding why people don't participate in electoral politics, why they dismiss it as something that is not, a useful effort. Jared and I often talk about, a lot of, the ballot or the bullet, sometimes understanding, like, doing the vote lets you know who's on your side, like, who can I come to when I need something to actually get done. And I don't personally see it as a futile experience to go and vote, but I also don't, I mean, I'm jobless right now, but even when I had a job, it was one where they gave you the day off to go vote, right? I wasn't working at a job where I wasn't going to be able to get the day off. I was going to have to go stand online for hours and hours. Like, there's a whole process. There's a whole process behind this that definitely deters people from wanting to participate. My issue with not participating is, of course, you then leave the decisions to all the people who are problematic to begin with. And so you don't have any opportunity to even push back within this system that is built to be completely useless, right? Because you don't have anybody in there to even say the thing or do the pushback that needs to happen. So I appreciate your campaign. I think I told you that my in-laws are all in Massachusetts. So I'm going to see how much pushing and pulling I can do in Massachusetts. We'll see. But I did want to make sure that we gave time for you to actually talk about your campaign, your platform, the things that you think people in Massachusetts need to understand, the things that you think people outside of Massachusetts need to understand about your campaign and what people in Massachusetts are struggling for. So I wanted to make sure we left enough time for that. So unless, Jared, did you have anything before we let Joe do the real spiel of, okay, cool. Thanks, Joe.
Well, thank you for that, Renee. And I'll talk a little bit about the campaign, where you can see our website's pulled up here, tacheforma.com, and you can find us on social media at the same handle. Our slogan is "Time's Up for the Billionaires," because ultimately there's somewhere between 900 and 1,000 billionaires in the United States. And they own as much wealth as the poorest 170 million people in the country. And we can track all of the problems of our society really fundamentally back to that reality. And so we have a 5-point program that speaks to those issues on different fundamental levels. One is saying we have the means, we need the power. That's kind of another overarching theme of the of the program that we actually do have all the wealth that we need. And we've gotten tricked into thinking that the billionaires work so hard for their wealth. And we've seen with Elon Musk in particular, who's now a trillionaire, just how categorically false that is. I mean, the man spends all his time playing video games or tweeting, and actually his wealth is the product of the hard work of the engineers, the manufacturers, the data scientists, the janitors, all the workers at SpaceX, Tesla, and all the other companies that he owns. They're working really hard. And that's this contradiction of capitalism, that all of our collective hard work is getting funneled up to the top. And so that point one of our program is to actually distribute that wealth collectively among us. And including, so we have this program of making the top 100 corporations public assets, because just like SpaceX, all these corporations, the same dynamic is true, that they're products of the collective hard work of people, and yet they're making all these profits while their workers and our society as a whole struggle. We have a point in our program that we need to save our planet from capitalism, because again, I grew up in the era where we were told that we need to do certain things by 2030 to reduce our carbon emissions if we want to have a livable planet, and we're hustling completely backwards on that front. And actually, the transition to renewable energy economy, the transition to having better public infrastructure in our country could also be tied up with creating a massive federal jobs program. And so that's the third point in our program, is meaningful jobs and living wages for all. People are already struggling to have quality work. More people are unemployed. More people are participating in the gig economy or other part-time work. And artificial intelligence in the hands of tech billionaires is threatening to wipe out millions of jobs across the country. From truck drivers, they're now starting to put autonomous 18-wheeler trucks on the road, and truck driving is the number one job for men without a college education in the United States. But also software engineers are seeing their jobs threatened by the prospects of AI. So from the blue collar jobs to the white collar jobs, everything is being threatened with the introduction of artificial intelligence under the control of billionaires, not to mention the impacts that has on our climate and on just the mental health and well-being of people, in particular young people who this technology is being introduced to without any kind of regulation or safety considerations. So for our point, meaningful jobs and living wages for all, if we take back our wealth from the billionaires and make those major corporations public assets, we use the resources we already have in our federal budget, we could create a massive federal jobs program to, one, transition to a green economy in a real way, and also invest in things that are underfunded and underinvested in right now, like healthcare and education, having more educators, more medical professionals, and making those services accessible to people all across our state and all across our country. The fourth is fund our needs, not the war machine. I already made this point around how much money we spend on the military every single year, just setting our tax dollars on fire to kill civilians abroad instead of to meet people's needs. And then the fifth point is to end the right-wing assault on our rights, and to make the point that we shouldn't fall for the demonization of trans people, of immigrants, of DEI, which is really code for Black people, and that these are groups that are being blamed for the problems of our society. And though the demonization of these groups is being used as a Trojan horse to roll back the rights of everybody across this country, and instead that we should understand that the only group that's really hurting the country is this billionaire class, and to stand united across these different demographic differences we have in the working class to fight for the things that we all collectively need and deserve. And those are the 5 basic points of the program, trying to make it very clear that we already do have solutions, logical solutions in place, but the two-party system is a big barrier for us actually being able to win the political power to implement those things. And I wanted to talk briefly, if I could, to your point, Renee, about people's non-participation in the electoral system, because just like I mentioned earlier, there's a certain logic to, I understand and I'm sympathetic to the logic of participating in lesser to evil politics, even though obviously I have a different vision. I also am very sympathetic to people who don't participate in the system at all, because all of the data shows that people's voting participation directly correlates to how much they think their vote is going to make an impact. And after the Voting Rights Act of 65 was passed, the Black voter participation was very, very high. So it's the right people fought for and people believed could be wielded to gain political power for the Black community. And over time, that participation rate has declined because, again, if you keep voting for politicians and see nothing happening, then there's a certain logic to not participating. And I want to make it clear that, to me, politics are not just about voting. Like, politics is about who has power, who can wield power in society. And a vote is one tactic to express your power or your voice, but there are many other tactics that organizers all across the country engage in, and the accumulation of all those things are really politics. So I really always try to emphasize to people that I don't consider myself a politician. It's an honor to be the party's candidate for the U.S. Senate in Massachusetts and to be able to represent this movement. And I feel a lot of responsibility for that. But I also feel that my greatest honor is to be a revolutionary and an organizer who's committed to this struggle for my lifetime. And that's something that anybody who's watching this video, that anybody we meet with the campaign can do. And that's politics, is us committing the whole of ourselves to this struggle to transform our society and build enough power to do so. And so I think that if you feel disillusioned with electoral politics in our society, good, you should. It's a symptom of the fact that the status quo isn't working. But don't be disillusioned with the prospects for change overall. Change is possible. Systems can be changed or abolished, as history shows us. And the capitalist system is much more unstable and vulnerable than it would have us think. You can see all the contradictions that are unfolding within it. But again, we can't just wait for it to be replaced with something else, because people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump and all of the kind of right-wing operatives, they have their vision for what they want society to be, and they're fighting tirelessly to do it. And so this campaign is an invitation for people to get on board with a different vision that is both sober-minded in facing the reality of the crises that we're dealing with today, but also is optimistic and thinks that there are the conditions for things to change if we can build the organizations and movement to fight for that. And I hope that people do check out the website, the social media, sign up to volunteer, spread the word, help us break the corporate media blockade, do whatever you can, because I do think it's a really exciting time to be a socialist and somebody who's building outside the two-party system. And you can't do it from the sidelines.
I appreciate it. This did prompt one last question that I didn't have written down, but as I thought of it, I was like, I don't know why I didn't have this written down. How much pushback are you getting from the powers that be in Massachusetts? Because the struggle in Jersey is real. Like, there's always a fight. Our congressional candidate had to go to court because they were trying to throw a bunch of his signatures, off the list, including his family members, which is hysterical when you think about it. And so I'm curious, and this will be, I know we got a time limit. Jared got a graduation party he's got to get to, but could you talk a little bit about that pushback? And then I will, previous to you starting, thank you again for your time and your energy and your willingness to take on this fight, because it is a big one. Ed Markey is probably one of the biggest ones that you could take on. I liken him in Massachusetts to Chuck Schumer in New York, that this long-standing, old school, old white Democrat who's been in power forever. So what you're taking on is a task within itself, and your willingness to take that on, I think, really does deserve all of the praise and gratitude that could be bestowed upon you for deciding to do that. Even though I know you were tapped on the shoulder to do it. I don't know how much voluntelling you were told not doing it, but you have to agree in the end, right? Like, all said and done, they can't force you to run. You have to decide to take that step. So I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate you being here. We'll be circling back. Jared and I are still having this conversation about how we're going to circle back to socialist reconstruction. So, you know, one of my thoughts would definitely be to tap in with all these folks from PSL that we've really been able to engage with in these real ways that are helpful to the audience and helpful to people who are trying to understand how we can force some change here. So
Aha!
Well, yeah, I appreciate that question. And I'll say yes. Obviously, I was asked to do this, and also I think Claudia has this saying that, you know, leadership is the willingness to embrace responsibility. So there's no it was something that I had to accept to do, and it's a different role for me, but also a continuation of the things I've been doing for the last 8 years. So it's something that I'm happy to do, and definitely would not be doing if I wasn't willing to do it, because you can't do anything effectively without having that heart and desire. As far as the pushback, I mean, Massachusetts is a liberal state, and I think one of the features of liberalism is avoidance. So I think that has been the primary strategy of the establishment to this point. I mean, Markey himself, for the last 6-7 months, has basically pretended like there's no election happening, even not acknowledging Seth Moulton, who is primarying him and is a sitting congressman. Like, he's not some fringe random coming out of nowhere. But the Democratic State Convention happened a few weeks ago in late May, and Moulton got enough delegate votes to get on the primary ballot for the Democrats in September. So now it'll be Markey versus Moulton in September. And now Markey has starting to use Seth Moulton's name more in his kind of public agitation. So I think that it's mostly been a quiet avoidance, efforts to sabotage in that way. But I think as the campaign grows momentum, there will be more, you know, frontal attacks. But really, I would say that both Markey and Moulton have the calculation that to address our campaign head on will actually make our campaign more popular because there are people who are supporting Markey because they know that Moulton is just a complete opportunist and makes his political positions based on the polling data. And there are people who are supporting Moulton because they don't want to vote for an 80-year-old person who's been in Congress for 50 years to have another 6-year term. But there's a lot of people who don't feel excited about either option and just haven't been exposed to our campaign yet. So they have the risk of, if they attack us head on, then they actually introduce a new base to our movement. And I think that's why their primary strategy has been avoidance and to ignore to the extent that they can. And that's why we're building a movement to be as visible and loud as possible and build something that's impossible to ignore.
Right on. Folks, the link to the campaign website is in the show description. Definitely look forward to continuing the conversations with Joe and other candidates of similarly situated politics. Definitely want to get back into socialist reconstruction and continue doing this work and supporting the good work of others. So, Joe, thank you very much. This has been great. Folks, please do tap in, share, whether you are from that region or not. Let folks know who you know do live there. I think all of us know somebody up around that area that could benefit from some awareness of this and the broader work and the analysis, even if not the ability just to vote for Joe. And then who knows, maybe we'll see Joe in the future national campaign of some kind where we all can vote for him. So, but thank you again. This has been great. Renee, thank you for making this happen. And a big salute to the undefeated chat as well, who we know are going to help continue to make this reverberate. And as always, peace, everybody. Only because we know you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And we'll catch you next week with more
Black Liberation Media is a collective of Black and African organizers, journalists, academics, and media personalities serving Black and African masses seeking to further grow in their understanding of themselves, their histories, and the African world through entertainment and news. Please continue to like, subscribe, and donate to the channel so we can further serve you and liberate our people. You can also go to blkliberationmedia.org, get some merchandise, and also become a Patreon member and a member from the YouTube. Please do what you can, share, and show your love as we will show ours for you. Black Liberation Media.